Hello everyone, and welcome back to the RimWorld Gun Empire series, Season 2, as it were. Today, my friends, we have a lot of work ahead of us. Now, I say that a lot, and we normally do, of course, but this time it rings true more than any other, given that the two largest factions on the planet are hostile with us now. One of the first projects we're completing today is via Downs, and it is in the form of research into complex electronics. Not exactly what you were probably expecting, given the fact that we're now in some sort of Cold War. However, this declaration by the Marshal Service and the rebels has everyone feeling a little bit tense, and I think some R&R is in order, some proper R&R in our recreation room. So we're going to be using our new research to create some new types of recreational items, such as a flat screen TV for everyone to enjoy in something of a movie theater. Interestingly enough, as we were putting the finishing touches on this new section to the recreation room, we actually had an armorer from one of our outposts contact us. Essentially, the long and short of it, he was going to make some specialized armor for us, but he was seeking some funding from the company, so we actually sent him 2,000 silver to complete his little project. Speaking of completing projects though, now our recreation room is finally completed. Now, you may have noticed that I had already removed our brainwashing room as well to make room for our little movie theater, so we need a new one. But this time around, I would actually build several of these rooms. That way we can brainwash several people at the same time, opposed to how we were previously just doing one at a time. Now, I haven't exactly looked into this all that deep, but I have noticed it seems like the Uncle Boris's brainwashing chair mod doesn't have an option anymore to reduce the resistance of a pawn, only their will, making it easy to enslave them, but not making it easy to recruit them, which was previously a feature before the 1.5 update when Anomaly dropped as well. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. I know Anomaly added a way so that you can reduce the resistance of a pawn just like you used to be able to do with the mod, so maybe that's it, but let me know what you guys think. Now, with the more minute task completed, we can focus on the more important things, such as the fact that our nuclear bomb storage room has been empty for far too long. Given the fact that things seem to be escalating quite a bit with the rebels and the marshals, we need some mutually assured destruction, if you know what I mean. And we now have 3 small pieces to that much larger puzzle. It's important to keep in mind that we could react quite quickly to an attack or a nuclear threat by using our artillery cannons in the front of the base, as they can target a marshal settlement not far away as well as a rebel one, giving us enough time to mobilize a ground invasion as well. However, our resource well is running quite dry at the moment, meaning that we can only create those 3 small nuclear warheads. That's not exactly enough to deter any of these larger factions. We'll need to think of something a little bit more clever if we hope to keep ourselves from becoming nuclear ash in a large mushroom cloud. And I think I might just have an idea. But before we could act on our little plan, it would seem the armorer that was requesting funding earlier has made good on his promise. Not only has he made some advanced recon armor, never to be seen on this planet before outside of the high-tech Marshal technology, but he has also given it to us. And we have decided to give it to Shinichi, as he is the commander and/or general of our mercenaries. Although that color sticks out like a sore thumb, so we would need to dye it a more grayish green color to kind of fit in with the surroundings just a little bit better. We would leave the gold trim, however, because if they're close enough to see that on his armor, they're already dead. Now then, on to our grand plan. One of our outposts nearby had detected a rebel mining site hidden away between the mountains. Now, not only were we going there, but we were also going to attack them. Now, you may say, Rat Knight, if you're worried about escalating tensions and hostility, why would you attack them outright? Well, 1, we desperately need some steel, and 2, the rebels have more of a sense of morality compared to the marshals, so if we were maybe to, I don't know, kidnap some of their civilians who are mining or their soldiers, they might not nuke us. As our forces were making the journey over to the mining site though, I remembered that last episode we had Pig 1 here, and Pig 1 is now starving to death because it is winter time. Just wanted to give you an update on that. We're also going to begin researching heavy turrets, which is part of Bean's Turret Pack, a new mod for Season 2 here, giving us access to a heavy turret as well as a missile launcher turret. These should make for some great additions to reinforcing our defenses. Now, we've basically sent all of our mercenaries away from the base to attack this mining site, so I have decided to leave Scott here with Downs to keep her protected, as well as all of her mechanoids. Between the old man's eagle eyes and his sniper rifle, along with all of our robotic companions here, she should be safe and sound, as should the base as well. Sometime later though, and our mercenaries had finally arrived at the mining site, let Operation Valley Assault begin. The worksite was probably of mediocre size, but was indeed chock full of civilian miners. There were also a few familiar faces among them. Don't get it twisted though, just because the majority of the forces here were civilians doesn't mean it wasn't well protected. They were even hiding a uranium slug turret under some scrap metal and chunks. Not to mention all the soldiers crawling about, of course. Thanks to the tall valley walls, our mercenaries were able to sneak in quite silently and begin taking a few pot shots at the miners. We were focusing our efforts on taking down that uranium slug turret, trying to draw its fire with our highwaymen. Since one of those large slugs to the chest could be detrimental to our health, we decided to try and pull our troops back. We would eventually be able to take down their automated defenses, leaving nothing but their soldiers and their miners to fend for themselves. Fending for themselves would be much harder than it sounds though, as there was hardly anything they could do against our highwaymen, running them up against the side of the mountain and crushing their bones. Truly a tragic, shameful, and disgusting way to go out of this world. Oh well. With the majority of their troops dead, I was beginning to think we wouldn't have any hostages to take until we took down this handsome purple fella, but we ended up killing his compadre, unfortunately. Well, my unlucky friend, it would seem that you are going to be our one and only hostage, at least for the time being. Now, let's see if we can tend to those wounds with a little bit of dirt and some, I don't know, rocks maybe? We may not have gotten that many hostages to take back home, but we did get plenty of weapons, thromboyan hammers and axes, and assault rifles, knives, you name it, they basically had it here, and now it's ours, which is pretty sweet. Most importantly of all though, were those sweet, succulent stacks of steel for us to take back home and use on any of our new projects, such as weapon production, or maybe a new vehicle, I guess we'll see. Speaking of vehicles, we would begin repairing ours, as well as loading all of that wonderful steel into both of them, that way we can haul it back home. However, we had received notification that militias were coming from the Blue Rock settlements to attack one of ours. In case you forgot, the Blue Rock settlements are under rebel control. Perhaps some type of retaliation effort after finding out that we destroyed their mining camp. Either way, we would set a pretty good sized defending force. A couple of days later, as we were returning back to base, the RimWorld Marshal Service began attacking yet another of our settlements. It would seem this war is finally becoming interesting. Because of all the recent attacks, I began working on a new squad loadout. This new soldier class is going to be a K9 unit. They will have a pretty standard armor set for our mercenaries, but they're also going to be equipped with a Hellcat rifle and a Husky. I would then expend a good bit of our treasury on upgrading those settlements that are nearest to our headquarters, with them being in such close proximity to our enemies. It was around about this time that our caravan had finally returned home, not only with our resources, but with our hostage, but most importantly with our resources. Plenty of steel, of course. As we began working on hauling all that back inside, we would also put our hostage in his prison cell for the time being. Once that was completed, it was time for us to drop off all the weapons that we had acquired. Speaking of which, by this point, our armory was filled to the brim with weapons and armor. Weapons and armor, of course, that we plan on taking to the Outlands and distributing among the locals for some silver, of course, as well as our good compadres, the Forgotten. The intelligence we've received from our bases in the Outlands has been telling us that the Forgotten are having some issues, you could say, with their armor. Essentially, the rebels and the marshals are working together in some joint operations to try and clear out the Forgotten, and they're getting popped like water balloons. So wrapping their heads in some bulletproof brain buckets might be just what the doctor ordered. However, unfortunately, on our way back home, we received notification that our defense had failed and the rebels had completely sacked one of our nearby bases. Those bastards. However, on the bright side, we shouldn't have any issue repairing any of the buildings or completely reconstructing any of the amenities that were in that settlement, as we have a shit ton of silver from the Outlands. Given the circumstances, with everything beginning to really heat up, I thought it might be a good idea for us to go ahead and increase our defenses as well as improve upon the defenses that we currently have, such as adding some of the brand new types of turrets that we've researched and also converting this old ancient danger that was next to our pillbox into a larger pillbox itself. The next morning though, during constructing, we could hear gunshots in the distance. There was an absolute bloodbath taking place just on the outskirts of our territory. It would seem leader of the Forgotten, Ortega, was leading a few of his men in a battle against what appears to be the RimWorld Marshal Service. My best guess they were coming here to trade and were completely ambushed. Even with the new weapons and armor that we had provided to them, they were heavily struggling against the Marshal's androids. Now granted, these androids could literally tank a Doomsday rocket launcher shot, so can you blame them? Badly injured, the Forgotten would begin trying to make a retreat out of the territory, while those who could still leave, as the others were crawling in a pool of their own blood, even poor Ortega. Broken and beaten, squirming on the ground. Could this be it? Lucky for him, the cavalry had just arrived. Yes indeed, my friends, fear ye not, for the S&R Rifle Company has come to the rescue once again. Save your applause for after the show. During our rescue of Ortega, we get to partake in one of our favorite pastimes, running over people, and this time around we'd also get to run over some androids, which was also pretty cool, though eventually the bastards would cause the highwaymen to stall out, meaning that this operation would have to be continued on foot. Using our chainsaw, we would dismantle that bastard. Perhaps we should call it the Can Crusher. Well, not only were we victorious in the battle, but it would also seem that we were the saving grace and or guardian angels of our customers here. I'm gonna level with you, we wouldn't have really minded just leaving them out there to die, but the problem is if we do that, who's going to buy all of our guns nowadays? No, we just couldn't allow it, even if keeping them here until they're healed up puts an even larger target on our backs. But with that little kerfuffle finally out of the way, we could once again begin prioritizing our attention to our defenses. Interestingly enough though, into the night, we would end up having a shaman merchant come from the Outlands. No doubt they have all sorts of hippy-dippy serums and doodads of some sort that they're wanting to sell to us, and we would actually end up buying some of those. They were quite persuasive and ended up talking us into buying some of this bioferrite. Perhaps we could make some type of melee weapons out of this material. We had also purchased a book along with some whiskey, but most importantly, we had also purchased a Psychic Insanity Lance, an ancient artifact of a weapon from a time long since past. We do have a particular target in mind for this weapon, but that's for me to know. A bit of time later, we had finally recruited Fithel into our ranks. I believe she was a Thromboian tribesperson from the Confederacy of Banya from last episode, but all I know now is she's our friend. And so we've decided to equip her with the best weapons and armor that, well, we haven't sold yet, and put her ass right to work in the kitchen. Not because she's a lady, but because she's good at cooking. Thank you. By this point, we had also finally finished up our heavy turrets, as well as another double autocannon, which would indeed exponentially improve our defenses. Last but not least though, in our refurbished and repurposed new peel box, we've also built 2 large missile launcher turrets. For that explosive damage, mama. We also built 2 steel barriers behind them just to give some extra cover to our mercenaries, as well as some sandbags outside. And just like that, our defensive upgrades, at least those on the outside, are finally completed. Perfect timing as well. Any raid right now in this thick snow will have a hard time getting away from our turrets. I wanted to make some upgrades on the inside of the base as well. We are making sure that we're well defended, but you know, our mercenaries aren't exactly the nicest bunch of people, so we have to make sure that we're keeping them happy to avoid an insider threat. You may also notice that during this, I'm deconstructing quite a few things like tables and chairs that I wouldn't exactly have to normally. The reason for that is because those were placed before the game was updated to 1.5, and they're a little glitched out. Regardless of that though, we would eventually get the new kitchen finished, and we even managed to place some nice wine racks so that we can keep our whiskeys and beers. But with that, the kitchen is now much nicer. Hopefully everyone shall enjoy enjoy it, and hopefully this will help quell any ambitious ideas. But if you thought I was done improving this base, you are, well, almost correct. The only thing I done after that was add some ceiling turrets, specifically 4 of them, to our nuclear storage room. Just because, well, we keep nuclear bombs in here. I also wanted to mention that our purple hostage with the funny name was doing A-OK, and I had also alerted the rebels to let them know that he's here, that way they don't drop any nukes on us. Funny though, they haven't responded yet. Well, somebody who did respond well to their medical treatment was Ortega and his friend Dirk here, who were leaving the territory after being completely healed. Leaving without saying goodbye, I might add, but whatever, as long as they buy some more guns. Later on that night, our taxes arrived from many of our settlements, and we actually planned on spending this silver on settling a few new settlements that were near the headquarters. You might be asking yourself why I keep doing this, and other than just expanding the company and the gun empire further, there's also a feature that allows you to call reinforcements from settlements, so I thought it might be useful and more realistic if they were closer by. After founding these 2 new settlements, we would also go through and do many upgrades for them. Most importantly, of course, was an ammunition mine, that way we can begin making some weapons. But I also noticed that many of our settlements near the headquarters were in close proximity to rebel and martial cities, and I thought it might be quite useful and convenient to have a few artillery outposts in these areas in case shit were to hit the fan anytime soon. As we were upgrading bases on the world map, we were also building some advanced solar panels back at the base, just to ensure that our power output is as effective as possible. However, this would be interrupted by a raid. Well, it would seem the rebels have finally come to try to rescue their hostage. Now, I do realize this is quite a small group of attackers, but I can guarantee you what they lack in size, they make up for in firepower, but also in experience, with their leader here being one of the more prominent members of the United Rebel Forces. And the reason I say all this is because we would be absolute fools to underestimate this raiding party. As you can see, they've even brought a high-tech android and or mechanoid into the battle as well, something we didn't even know that they had. We'll need to put a heavy focus on overloading its shields during the battle, as it intercepts ground projectiles, protecting everyone within its shield as well. We had hoped that they would ride in on their vehicles, but as mentioned, these rebels appear to be quite knowledgeable, as riding in between the valley to get to the base in these would be a death sentence. Speaking of which, they were nestled into the valley walls quite well, so firing our mortars unfortunately would have very little effect. Our mercenaries would rush to their battle stations as the rebel forces began to advance against our headquarters. As mentioned, we were going to focus our efforts on their mechanoid and its shield. Using our automated turrets to burst the shield seemed to work out in the beginning here. This way none of its companions could hide behind it. But even without its shield, the rebels and the android would continue pushing on, destroying many of our defenses very quickly. Though in doing so, the rebels had set a trap for themselves. It was hard for them to see through all the smoke and the flames, giving us an ample opportunity to gun them down. Once the chaos began to clear a bit and they realized what was happening to their numbers, they would begin to try and flee. We had already had Richard circling around to try and take Carol down so she wouldn't escape. We preferred to capture her, so hopefully she doesn't bleed out on the battlefield, as we're waiting for her robots and the others to clear out a little bit before we make our move. Don't get me wrong, they would make a valiant effort to try and recover any of their companions that were still lying out there injured. It was just that they couldn't stop our overwhelming forces that had now taken over the battlefield completely. Realistically, it was the best decision they could have made, as anything else would have been a death sentence. Speaking of which, other than Carol, there were a couple of other rebels lying out on the ground wishing to die, but of course we wouldn't allow that to happen, as we needed more hostages. Not everyone would be as lucky as these few rebel soldiers, though. Sorry, lady, too many mouths to feed. As you can see, like I mentioned earlier, they pack one hell of a punch, and they had already done one hell of a number on our defenses. If we got paid in silver every time we had to rebuild one of these turrets, well, I would be tickled pink, to be honest with you, because we expend a lot of our silver having to replace them. Resources are expendable, though, people are not, and I'm glad that no one died during this battle, and that we can continue to ensure our safety by keeping these hostages in our prison. Hopefully now, the rebels will have some understanding of how powerful our upgraded defenses truly are. I also realized that the leader of the rebel attackers, Carol here, is 94 years old. My god, these rebels are built different. We had to dump an entire magazine into her to get her to drop. Well, now that we've taken care of the attackers themselves, we would have to figure out what we were going to do with their vehicles. I wish there were a way for us to claim these for ourselves, as I think they'd make a great addition to our vehicle repertoire, but I'm afraid that is just not a possibility, so instead we would have to settle for gunning them down and destroying them. Now, the best thing about this is we got a little bit of scrap metal, which wasn't all that important, but importantly, we did end up getting some vehicle parts, so that was pretty good. We would also receive some intelligence and notification that the RimWorld Marshal Service was about to attack another of our settlements, so of course we would end up setting a defending force, and while we were waiting on the outcome of that battle, we would take our time and begin deconstructing many of the mechanoids that the rebels had brought along with them for some different things like steel. You could basically call this recycling, turning these war bots back into guns and shields and armor, just as God intended. We would also begin adding a new layer to our defenses with a steel high security fence just outside of our turrets. Now, this added layer of defense is somewhat trivial for the most part, I suppose, but the most important thing about it is that you can only shoot through the gates, as the actual fence itself has a very high cover effectiveness, so much so that you can't shoot over it or through it. Essentially meaning that if the shit hits the fan, we can run behind this new security fence, and it's also important because I feel like the attackers, once they overwhelm our turrets, and that's sure to happen again, even with our upgraded turrets, they come straight through this area, so hopefully the fence can try to delay the inevitable, if you will. Now, by this point, within the walls of the base, as well as all over our territory here on the map, we have accumulated a very large pile of steel slag chunks and/or scrap metal chunks. Now, though the process of this is going to be quite tedious and take a very long time and also be quite time consuming and take away from things like weapon creation and whatnot, I have decided to build an electric smelter. That way we can begin smelting these chunks into proper steel that we can use. Because it hardly matters if it's taking time away from producing weapons if we don't have enough steel to actually use. A bit of time later, and we were informed that our defense of our settlement against the RimWorld Marshal Service had failed and they had destroyed 2 of our buildings. Very well, since these bastards are taking the gloves off with us and attacking our settlements, maybe we should take the gloves off as well and prepare for a retaliatory strike. Not to worry, I don't plan on using any nukes, but at the bomb crafting station, we made some little surprises for them. It's time that they found out the length that we'll go to protect our own. Ah, there we are, just a little something for their troubles. 2 little gifts from the S&R Rifle Company, carefully wrapped in smoldering ash. It would seem that we also achieved a corpse for our efforts, and also some pretty minor damage to the surrounding buildings, albeit better than nothing, I suppose. Well, with our swift retribution delivered to those fools, we can now focus on some projects back at the headquarters. First and foremost, I'm going to be building some sterile tiles in our operating room. This will make the room much cleaner and, of course, make our chance of getting a proper operation done as well as tending wounds much better. Since we have so many sandstone blocks and limestone blocks, I also want to go through each individual room that doesn't have a proper floor and only has a smooth floor and replace them with some proper tile. Not only that, but I would also utilize a lot of this stone to build some proper plant pots and things of that sort that we should have had a long time ago, really. We're probably the 3rd most powerful and the 3rd richest faction on the entire planet, so it's about time we started acting like it. I also wanted to go ahead and name our vehicles, as I did ask you guys for some names last episode, and of course you happily provided. So first up, we have our truck that we're going to be naming Shinichi's Revival. Something of an homage to our old truck, Shinichi's Pride, of course, and this is a great name from our friend Lisa Skinner-X1Y, so thank you very much. Moving Moving on though, we would also be naming our highwayman the Rattlesnake, which is in line with our theme of desert predators, I suppose you could say, as our last one was named the Sand Viper. I didn't want the paint job on this one to be identical to the last one, the Sand Vipers, so it is slightly different, just using the same color scheme, of course. But of course, credit where credit is due, the wonderful name, the Rattlesnake, is from our compadre, Murderer of Seahorses. An interesting name, my friend. And a big thank you to everyone who provided a name suggestion. Keep in mind that I very well may use your suggestion in the future, so keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, we are going to be building a new path next to the base here, as well as a helipad. As we were in the process of construction, I did notice that some of our loyal soldiers were passing by for one of our nearby settlements. Now, of course, it's not all that uncommon to see our mercenaries out and about, but I did find this of particular interest because they had a husky with them, just like the canine unit that we had made previously. Anyhow though, after trying out a few different iterations, I finally found a combination of slate blocks and concrete that I liked for our new helipad, and we would go ahead and build a new Mosquito helicopter on it. And now with that, not only do we have a new teeny tiny helicopter to move any goods back and forth or perform any rescue missions perhaps, but we also now have an appropriate path to get to our defensive line. But wait a minute, you did hear me say that we might be performing a rescue mission, didn't you? Well, you did not mishear me, I can tell you that much. After performing a swift little pickup, we now have one of our forgotten members of our team. Ah, Pig 1. Welcome home, old pal that none of us have met yet, except for Scott that one time when he purchased you and left you in the desert. Well, we would also go ahead and give the pig a name. We will be naming this handsome young lad Wilbur. But this splendid name comes from our splendid friend Tyrone 1773, who was saying that if we rescue the pig, we should call him Wilbur from Charlotte's Web. Well, my friend, not only did you inspire the name, but you also inspired me to go and rescue the pig, because without you, I probably would have let it starve to death, to be honest with you. Shortly thereafter, I realized that today is actually a holiday. For those of you that watched Season 1 of this series, it is the Banyayan Invasion. For those of you that did not watch Season 1, this is a holiday that we created after defeating the largest raid ever that was actually from the Confederacy of Banya, as you might have guessed. Throughout the day, there was a bit of a somber tone as everyone was working due to the serious events of the holiday. However, by that evening, we were all having celebratory drinks. We were even hanging out in our recreation room playing some poker, some pool, and even some arcade machines as well. Scott and Richard were hanging out around the garage next to the Rattlesnake and smoking a couple of cigars together, just shooting the shit. Holidays like these, and just times like these in general, we find that it's best to kick back and just sort of admire the empire that they've built. Because truly, we're not only celebrating the holiday today, we're also celebrating our great successes throughout this episode, such as capturing hostages, successful operations against the rebels, and defenses against them as well. Truthfully, things were great, and they were finally going our way.